right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week so far. We are moving on with our player rankings today. We have two more videos. Today we're hitting number 3 and number 2. Tomorrow we'll be Friday, I should say, we'll be hitting number 1. And then next week I have 3 different follow-up videos that we're going to be doing from this list. I've got the guys from Nerd Sesh coming on, and we're going to kind of debate the top 11. If any of them have any disagreements with me, we're going to kind of get into that. And then we're going to have that bragging rights video I told you about where we just talk about ranking the top end of the players strictly based on what they accomplished last year. And then I also wanted to hit the GM survey. That's always a fun way to kind of get into some topics about the beginning of next season. So we'll do that as our 3 shows next week. And then after that, we're getting into our season previews. And we're going to just go team by team, power ranking style, up the list, talking about their off seasons and what we expect them to do heading into next season. So that's basically our September. And then from there, we're going to be covering actual real basketball games. Today was actually the first time this summer where I really started to miss NBA basketball. I always used to miss it a ton before I started to do this for a living, but obviously I put in so much work during the playoffs that I actually could kind of look forward to the break when we get into the summer. And just this morning, I just got that little bit of an itch of I was watching some synergy footage of Giannis scoring in ball screens, and I was like, man, I miss just watching NBA games. And so I'm really excited to get back into that. 1 month from today, we're going to be knee deep in training camp and with actual regular season basketball games just 2 weeks away at that point. So I'm really, really excited. But today, number 3 and number 2. And then I got a mailbag for the tail end of the show as well. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed. Wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight, don't forget it's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. And last but not least, keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments so we can keep hitting them at the tail end of these rankings shows. Specifically, if you disagree with a ranking and you want to make a basketball case for why you disagree, drop it in those comments and we'll hit it at the tail end of these shows. All right, without any further ado, let's hit it. Number 3, Giannis Antetokounmpo. 73 games played last year. Finished 4th in MVP voting. This is actually a crazy stat. Giannis's 6th consecutive season finishing in the top 5 of MVP voting. So talk about a perennial MVP candidate. Doesn't get more consistent than Giannis on that front. 30.4 points per game, 11.5 rebounds per game, a career high 6.5 assists per game, while also dropping his turnovers from 3.9 to 3.4 year over year, although obviously Dame helps on that front. He also got 2.3 stocks per game, missed the all-defense team for the 2nd consecutive year after making first-team all-defense 4 years in a row. Shooting splits, he shot 61% from the field. That's a career high. 27% from 3. 62% in effective field goal percentage, which is also a career high. And 65% in true shooting percentage, which is also a career high. So adding Dame to the equation, relieving Giannis of some of the lower percentage shots that he had to take, predictably led into a massive increase in his efficiency. His shooting stats per synergy. 0.72 points per jump shot, and he's trending in the wrong direction. He was 0.77 the year before that, 0.87 the year before that, and he's about to turn 30 this year. So I think we can go ahead and write off the whole Giannis ever being a good jump shooter thing. He's just going in the wrong direction on that front, which is fine. As I've said, it's been way more about short range shot making, like hook shots and stuff like that. We're going to get more into that in a little bit, as well as his playmaking that are more important counters to his rim pressure than actually hitting jump shots. He took 40 catch-and-shoot jump shots last year, only made 10 of them. 38 of those 40 were completely unguarded as well. So it's just, even when he's standing still with all day, he just can't knock those shots down. He took 292 pull-up jump shots, made 34% of them, but they were mostly pull-up twos, so that's only 0.87 points per shot, which obviously is not very efficient on a pull-up jump shot. 53% on floaters, but he only took 17 all year, so that's not really a part of his game. 42% on hooks, and he only took 57 of them all year. This is the shot that I've been begging on him to work on, just like a simple post up on the left block with the ball in his right hand, like a drop step into the lane, just a little left shoulder hook over the top. I don't think anybody can guard it, and I think it's a shot he could actually get to the point where he hits 50-55% of them if he put the work in. But for whatever reason, that just has not really come together as a shot for him. And specifically in the playoffs, I just view that as a shot that he could use, but it just hasn't really come together. But Giannis is still the most devastating force attacking the rim in the league, and it's not close. Here are 3 stats to demonstrate that fact to you guys. Giannis made 9.1 shots in the restricted area per game last year. Second place was Zion at 6.9. So by far the most made field goals in the restricted area in the league. Among the 59 players who attempted at least 3 shots in the restricted area per game, Giannis was third in field goal percentage in the restricted area at 77.5%. The only 2 guys that were ahead of him were Lively and Gafford, the 2 centers for Dallas, which are just getting spoon-fed dunking opportunities on lobs and cuts. And so basically, out of 59 players that are high-volume finishers around the rim, Giannis is the most efficient guy that's creating those opportunities mostly for himself, or at least partially for himself. Giannis finishes a lot on rolls and cuts, which we'll get into in a minute. But the guys that are ahead of him are only scoring on cuts and rolls. Giannis is just as efficient as those guys on massive volume, despite creating a lot of those opportunities for himself. He also had 251 dunks, which was the most in the entire NBA. So, as we mentioned, Giannis, the most devastating downhill force in the NBA, in conjunction with him having his best passing season of his career. That's where he derives the majority of his offense. Now, as far as play types go, the majority of Giannis's offensive value comes on the margins. He made 198 baskets in transition. That was the most in the NBA. He got 1.23 points per transition push. So every Giannis transition push is worth a 123 offensive rating. Now, to give you guys some perspective, remember the Pacers when they were cooking with grease before Halliburton hurt his hamstring. They were at a 124 offensive rating, I think, and they were the best offense in the league at that point. So basically, Giannis transition push is still one of the most devastating and efficient play types in the NBA. And that's why defensively you have to build that wall when Giannis starts to get his head of steam. He made 118 baskets on cuts or drop-offs. That was the 6th most in the entire NBA. And he made 75 baskets on rolls to the rim in ball screens. For perspective, this is a lot having to do with Dame. He only had 45 the previous year, so almost twice as many shots that he made on rolls to the rim in ball screens as a virtue of bringing Dame into the equation. I expect that to get even better this next year, as there are some pretty basic things that Milwaukee can do to make some adjustments in the way that they set up their pick and roll, which I think will work better. Specifically, just more to the empty side so that Giannis has easier reads to make when he's rolling. There was some struggles there with the way that they ran their pick and roll last year that we've obviously gone over at length on this show. He also made 74 baskets on offensive rebounds, which is the 9th most in the entire NBA. So if you add those together on just offensive rebounds, cuts, rolls, and transition, so all just like kind of on the margins of basketball, 465 total makes. So to give you an idea, 56% of Giannis's total made baskets this year fell into those 4 categories. And so I wanted to give you guys some like an example as a comparison. So 56% of Giannis's made baskets were offensive rebounds, cuts and rolls, or transition pushes, right? So the closest that I could come up to is a guy like LeBron. And the reason why I looked at LeBron is, 1, he's a big forward who plays kind of the same position. 2, a lot of transition pushes. This is a crazy LeBron stat. So Giannis had 198 made baskets in transition. LeBron had like 175, which is like crazy that a 39-year-old was nearly as effective a transition weapon as Giannis was. Just a completely insane stat, but LeBron's the second best player, or the best player of all time, in my opinion. So there you go. That's going to take a while for me to learn how to say that properly. But anyway, he had a big forward, a lot of transition pushes, does a lot of work functioning as a big. Like ever since the Lakers brought in Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell, LeBron will set a lot of ball screens similar to Giannis does. And so I thought that he was Giannis is a unicorn and LeBron is not like Giannis. But among all the players in the league that play his position, LeBron's probably the closest in terms of like the way he functions in the Lakers offense. Transition pushes, functions as a big, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, LeBron is so much more of like a surgical perimeter initiator than Giannis is, but he also just isn't the same athletic wrecking ball that Giannis is, right? So they're not the same, but it's the closest I can come up with. LeBron made 685 field goals last year. 296 of his field goals were transition, cuts, rolls, or offensive rebounds, which was just 43% of his total made field goals. So to give you an idea, like a player that kind of plays a somewhat similar kind of role, LeBron about 43% of his baskets on the margin, Giannis at 56%. So I just did that to try to give you guys some perspective on just how much Giannis relies on that, basically just getting garbage baskets that are in transition or in cuts and rolls or offensive rebounds. So Giannis is somewhat of an unusual superstar to rank on this list because he's actually a pretty limited half-court shot creator, which we're going to get into in a minute, but he's pouring in 30 points per game on 65% true shooting. So like how do you factor that sort of thing in? He's we're going to talk about his offensive limitations, and this guy's one of the highest volume and efficiency scorers in the NBA. And so that's where it gets a little bit complicated. But in the half court, that's where we see some of Giannis's limitations. Actually had a pretty solid pick and roll season last year. He got 1.07 points per possession, including passes on 426 reps. The main thing there is he just got way better at identifying like opportunities to get downhill in ball screens. And so it looked a little different, right? So like in 4 or 5 ball screens, meaning when Giannis was the 4 and he'd have Brook Lopez set the pick for him, most teams would either switch it or run a drop coverage. And so if there's a drop coverage, the guy who's guarding Giannis has to be big and strong enough to guard Giannis. And so that guy is going to struggle to get over the top of that screen. Now Giannis is going downhill at your center, and your center is going to be probably a slow-footed guy that you matched up with Brook Lopez for obvious reasons, right? And Giannis will just slalom around that guy and get all the way into the rim and lay it up. Or you have to just completely pack the paint, which opens up those passing reads, right? But the guard screens are where I was actually most impressed by Giannis last year. And the main thing that I noticed is like most teams will have a hedge in that situation, right? So Giannis has the ball being guarded by a big forward. We're going to have a guard come up and set the screen, right? Because you're trying to bring that guard into the action. As Giannis comes off, the guard who's guarding the guard is almost always going to hedge in that case and come way outside, right? And the big man is going to be fighting over the top of that screen to try to get back in front of Giannis. And Giannis got really good at like opening up his hips like he was about to go off that screen and then whipping it back to the other side with the crossover. And now you're fucked because the guy guarding the ball is now engaged with the screener and trying to fight over the top, and the other defender is in a hedge. So he's all the way on the opposite side of the screen. And so Giannis was able to come just cleanly downhill off of those types of actions and get a ton of really good looks in the paint. So he personally shot 61% on ball screens, got 1.07 points per possession, which is actually really good, but somewhat low volume though, only 426 reps. In ISO, 366 points on 366 possessions, including passes. You guys can do the math there. That ranks 16th out of 24 players to attempt at least 250. So on the lower end, in the lower third among high volume ISO players. And then 411 post-ups for 423 points, 1.03 points per possession. That ranked 10th out of the 18 players to attempt at least 250 post-ups in our high volume post-up list. So bottom third ISO player, high volume, bottom half post-up player in the high volume list. So his total half-court possessions, 1,203 possessions, 1,244 points. That's 1.03 points per possession. That's basically the worst out of all the guys that are in this list in that top 11. Even Anthony Edwards in his regular season numbers where he was, but that was before he took his leap in the postseason with substantially less offensive talent around him, more of a defensive-minded roster. Even Ant was more efficient by I think a solid 2 or 3% more than Giannis was as a half-court initiator. So that's really the only weakness with Giannis, right? Like we're going to talk about his defense here in a minute, and I still think he's top tier for defensive impact and versatility, especially in the postseason, which we'll get into more detail here in a minute. But the main downside with Giannis is that even though he's a statistical monster on offense, like 30 points per game on 65% true shooting is like literally insane, But the reality is that his style, that A+ downhill rim pressure mixed with like average to slightly above average playmaking, like B+ playmaking, that eventually runs into a ceiling when he hits the best defenses in the league, when the game slows down in the half court. Like when he runs into a front court that is big and strong and fast enough to just keep away his easy rim opportunities, and then a defensive scheme that takes away some of his easier passing reads, suddenly it becomes about making more advanced reads as a passer and about hitting shots over the top of really good defenders. And both of those things are weaknesses for Giannis. His best go-to over-the-top shot when he has to shoot over a defender is a left shoulder hook, and he's only making that about 42% of the time right now, which is worth about 0.84 points per shot. And he's become a good passer, but he's not good enough to make up for the lack of that solid over-the-top shot. He's not a surgical passer. And so most of Giannis's playoff failures have come down to him ending up in close games late and just not really having a consistent way to attack and generate quality shots. Like even as recently as 2 years ago when he was playing against the Heat, we saw what happened in that series. It was Jimmy Butler going the other way and just surgically demolishing them with over-the-top shot making, while Giannis goes down and bricks a left shoulder hook over Bam Adebayo because he can't cleanly beat him to the rim the way he can most of the lesser defenders that are in the league, right? Now, for the purpose of the Bucks, they have Dame now. So that counters a lot of these specific issues. But for the purpose of this exercise, which again, remember, the criteria here is we're drafting from scratch. And Dame is also in the top 25, so he'd get drafted by a different team, which means that as we're kind of like drafting among this like kind of a vacant list of teams with all of the league's players available, as we're drafting for this upcoming season, when I'm building around Giannis as my third overall pick, I've got to fill in that half-court offensive initiation piece, and that's a challenging piece, especially when I'm going to be circling back around with a guy who's outside of the top 30 in the NBA. And so it's a little challenging. To take it further, if I had the third overall pick, theoretically in a snake draft, I would have pick pick 57 or 58, right? So like I'm going to get Giannis, and I'm going to get the 58th best player in the league. And is the 58th best player in the league going to be someone that can help me address Giannis's limitations as a shot creator? That's just something that has to be factored in. And that's the main reason why I have him behind Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic. And I've gone over this in more detail before, but like it's really this simple to me. Like if I'm building from scratch, I think it's easier to take a limited defensive player and craft him a small defensive role while building a functional defense around him with role players than it is to do the opposite, which is to take a limited offensive player and plug him into and somehow like account for his weaknesses with role players and scheme on the offensive end. Like elite high-end offensive shot creation is a superpower that is impossible to replicate, whereas like elite team defense is something that I can do even with some limited offensive players. And so that's the main ethos for me that drives having a guy like Giannis behind guys like Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic. As for the defensive end, Giannis is an incredibly versatile frontline defender. You can use him in ball screens as like the screen defender. We've seen amazing reps of that. Specifically, if you guys remember the 2021 finals, that was like one of the big ways that Giannis swung that series late was just being a devastating ball screen defender, being able to get up on the ball handler while also recovering back to the lob threat. Famously, he had that huge block on the DeAndre Ayton lob. I think that was in game 4. It's either game 4 or it was in game 5 or 6. I can't remember exactly which game it was of that series, but he's a very good ball screen defender. Just an absolute devastating low man. That's probably his best role, meaning like if Brook Lopez is on the screen and he's coming up to the level, Giannis has the roller, Brook Lopez's roller getting behind him. He's got to split the difference between the roll man and the guy in that weak side corner. And there's few players in the league that are even close to as impactful as Giannis in terms of stepping up and bothering that roll man in some way, shape, or form. But also if the skip pass is made or if the roller makes the skip pass, being able to recover out to the corner. And one of my favorite examples of that was a game against the Mavericks a few years back where I watched Luka Doncic deliberately bring Giannis into the action in switches just so that he didn't have to use him as the low man. Had no interest in shooting over Giannis, wasn't even trying, but was just making sure that the guy he was throwing the skip pass over was a different guy than Giannis because he was so scared of Giannis's ability to close. Scared is the wrong word, but because he was concerned about Giannis's ability to shut that action down. You can use him in a switching scheme. I don't think he's as great on the perimeter guarding some quicker players as some of the other big guys in the league, guys like AD, guys like even Gobert, even guys like Bam, but he's still really good at it. He's just not as good as some of the guys at the top of the league, but you can certainly use him in a switching scheme, and he's an elite defensive rebounders. When you combine all that together, it just makes an incredible defensive foundation. And specifically, that ability to be in two places at once is what unlocks aggressive coverages. So if you've got a guy that in a ball screen can guard the ball handler but also recover to the lob, or a guy that as the low man can recover or that can shut down the lob threat but also recover to the corner, that makes it so that you can give up a 4-on-3 without having to worry about actually giving up an open shot, right? What that means is you can put two on the ball. That's an amazing bit of flexibility, right? Like in a low man situation, you can have Brook come way out to the level of the screen because Giannis is one of the best in the world at being two places at once on that back line. And then as far as the ball handler goes in ball screens, if Giannis is in the action as the screen defender, his ability to split the difference between those two guys makes it so that you don't have to use your low man. You can keep your low man in the corner, at least closer to the corner, which allows you to kind of keep your defense out of rotation. It's a huge value. Like when you're building a team from scratch, you can't do much better than Giannis Antetokounmpo as a defensive foundation. But as I said, the reason why that does it, because that's the inevitable question, right? Jason, if Giannis is a much better defensive foundation than Luka and Jokic, why isn't he above them? That's where we get into that bit I was just talking to you guys about as it pertains to building an offense around a limited offensive player versus building a defense around a limited defensive player. One other issue with Giannis that is somewhat concerning. He's starting to encounter some more health issues, specifically with his knee, which is scary. And a crazy stat to demonstrate this to you guys, Giannis has been available to play in just 3 of Milwaukee's last 11 playoff games. And he played just 11 minutes in one of those games. So he's played in basically 2.5 playoff games total in the last 27 months. That's sketchy. That's a little bit concerning. He's also, in his last 5 years, averaging only 65 regular season games played. So Giannis is no longer what I would consider to be like a sure thing in terms of availability. Like he's closer to AD than he is to Jokic in terms of like actually being ready to play all of the time. And so I think that's become an interesting little curveball to throw in here. But in summary, Giannis is a rock solid foundation to build around. He's one of the top 5 defensive players in the world with an abundance of different ways to use him, which obviously helps for roster building. And you can just book him for 30 points per game on 60 plus true shooting every single year. And that is incredibly steady production that you can take and build around, and it makes for an easier job for the GM. But his weakness as a half-court shot creator and that strange availability issue that I just talked about, put him behind the top 2 guys for the time being. NFL Week 1 is here, and a new season means new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Fans have spoken. We want to bet on touchdowns. DraftKings heard us and is delivering. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking a player to score a touchdown. The first game of the season is coming up on Thursday. Kansas City is currently favored by 3. Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $250 in bonus bets instantly. Plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $250 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 and get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer ends September 19th. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. You know, whatever your vibe, it's a Camry vibe. That's the reason the Toyota Camry has been America's best-selling sedan for the past 22 years. And the all-new Camry takes it to a new level. It comes equipped with a standard 225 horsepower engine and available sport-tuned suspension, providing power, speed, and agility. Think of the Camry as your typical swingman. And it's a good-looking car, too. The Camry racing on the 2025 NASCAR circuit was based on the racing-inspired design of the all-new Camry, with available features including two-tone midnight black metallic roof and rear spoiler and 19-inch alloy wheels. The interior is just as fly. The Camry has a modern interior design with available features like a leather-trimmed steering wheel and multi-stage heated and ventilated front seats. We're talking fundamentals and flash. You don't see that combo often on the court or on the road. And because every all-new Camry is a hybrid, it has awesome fuel efficiency with up to an EPA estimated 51 miles per gallon combined. Whatever your vibe, it's a Camry vibe. Learn more at toyota.com/Camry. Number 2. Luka Doncic, 70 games played, 33.9 points per game. That was our scoring champion last year, most in the NBA. 9.2 rebounds per game, 9.8 assists per game. That was third in the NBA behind Trae Young and Tyrese Halliburton. He got 1.9 stocks per game, 1.4 steals per game. Did some really solid work as a weak side defender playing passing lanes. Like, Luka did take significant strides as an off-ball defender this year. Most of his defensive issues were on the ball, particularly in switches, which we'll get into more later. His shooting splits, 48.7% from the field, 38.2% from three on 10.6 attempts. That was the major revelation last year. Massive increase in three-point volume and efficiency. Had his step-back three going like never before. I think he shot 38% on step-back threes during the regular season last year. 79% in free throws, 57% in effective field goal percentage, and just under 62% in true shooting. The shooting stats per synergy, 1.08 points per jump shot, 1.12 points per catch and shoot jump shot, shot 48% field goals when he was unguarded. That was a really useful thing alongside Kyrie Irving. 72% in catch and shoot unguarded jump shots when you account for threes. That's when you weight it for threes. Luka was the best pull-up jump shooter in all of basketball last year. He got 1.09 points per shot. Among the 16 players in the NBA to attempt at least 500, Luka was first. He also made the most in the league at 358. So the highest volume and efficiency pull-up jump shooter in the league last year. That's a really impressive stat. He got 1.06 points per face-up jumper. Took about 2 per game last year, so that was a really effective shot for him. And then his go-to shot in ball screens, 55% on floaters. He made 83 of them. The deadly move. You just come over the top of the screen, put the defender in jail on his backside, kind of work his way up that right lane line, and then just shoot that little floater into the lane. He could just make it at such a high rate. Then he shot 71% at the rim, but he doesn't get there a ton. He had 2.9 makes in the restricted area per game. Less than you'd hope for a big forward, but at the same time, kind of somewhat what you'd expect for a guy who's not necessarily a great athlete. I want to dive some more into Luka, like putting defenders in jail and the way that he scores here in a minute when we get done with our play type data. So play type data, this is Luka's claim to fame, right? 1,500 ball screens, including passes, for 1,656 points. That's 1.10 points per possession. That ranked 5th out of the 15 players to log at least 1,000 reps this year. He ran the most ISOs in the league with 736, 80 more than the second person on that list, which was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Still got 1.09 points per possession. That was 7th out of the 24 players to run at least 250. And then he ran 233 post-ups for 250 points, including passes. That's 1.07 points per possession. That's in the 64th percentile. So if you total those all together, Luka ran 2,469 possessions of half-court shot creation. That's more than twice as much as Giannis, just for some perspective. 1.10 points per possession, including passes. That's a massive volume, obviously. But like the efficiency is obviously crazy, 1.10 points per possession, but I don't think people realize how crazy that straight up total number of possessions is. Almost 2,500 pick and rolls, ISOs, and post-ups. That's a one-man offense, the likes of which we haven't seen since James Harden, and without the playoff limitations that James Harden has, because Luka's so much more versatile offensively. So what is the secret? What makes Luka such a deadly half-court shot creator? And to me, it comes down to the size and strength that allows him to get to his spots, combined with the footwork to make sure he's getting there efficiently in terms of movement, and then the playmaking is attached to it. So I want you to think of it from a very basic standpoint. When Luka is faced up with a defender one-on-one, even though he's not particularly quick, his ability to change direction by selling moves is what allows him to beat people off the dribble. Luka, I've said this a lot to my young players, the ones that I train in high school. When you're learning how to dribble, it's less about making big sweeping crossover dribbles and more about when you were facing to the right, were your eyes to the right, were your shoulders to the right, were your hips to the right? Did you look like you were going to go to the right before you brought the ball back to the left? Because that matters way more than how nifty your actual ball handling move is. It's about selling a change of direction, right? And Luka's the best at this, in my opinion. Luka will hit multiple dribble combinations, and if you watch him, he will literally, in slow motion, he will sell every single part of every single move with every part of his body. I think he's an excellent player to watch if you're a young basketball player out there in terms of just learning how to disguise your moves better. So that's piece number one. Then there's the size and strength piece. So one of the things that Luka does that kills everyone is putting a defender in jail. So think of it like this. If you go underneath the ball screen, Luka's just going to hit a pull-up three, right? He shot 38% on him last year. That's 1.14 points per shot. Just not a good idea. You can't go under the ball screen on Luka. So you have to chase him over the top. Now, as soon as you chase him over the top, here's the ball screen, right? Luka's coming off shoulder to shoulder with that screener. So if he comes off shoulder to shoulder, there's no gap in there for you to beat him around and get in front of him, right? So now you're behind him. But then what Luka does, instead of like guys like Anthony Edwards and other downhill athletes, they'll come off shoulder to shoulder and then they'll attack immediately. And that's because that's their advantage. Their biggest advantage is just trying to get downhill with real force and speed, right? Luka's not a downhill force and speed guy. So what he does is as soon as he comes off that ball screen, and this is what he did to Jaden McDaniels the entire Western Conference Finals, now Jaden McDaniels is behind him. And Luka's just so much bigger and stronger than him, he's basically doing a reverse post-up. So like in a post-up, Luka's going to be backing a guy like Jaden McDaniels down, right? And using power dribbles to get closer and closer to the rim. He's doing the opposite in those ball screens. He's coming off the ball screens and Jaden is behind him, and he's taking slow dribbles forward while also sealing with his backside and his shoulders to make sure Jaden stays behind him. From there, he's just going to work downhill while reading the screen defender. So in this case, Gobert, right? And all he's doing is he's sitting there and he's reading Gobert as he's got Jaden trapped on his backside. He's getting downhill. If Gobert steps up, boom, lob pass to Lively or Gafford. If Gobert steps up and someone like Karl Anthony Towns like steps over and checks the roll man, that's when he's throwing that looping skip pass over the top to the weak side corner. And then if Gobert stays back and the low man Cat stays back, he's just going to keep working with Jaden on his backside until he gets about 7-8 feet from the basket. And that's where he's going to take that little floater that he's hitting at damn near 55% right now. And so that's really what makes him so devastating, is there's not really a coverage that you can use against him. If you blitz him, they have such wonderful 4-out spacing that it's going to be Derek Lively catching on the roll with two options in the corner, and there's only going to be two guys to guard those three guys, right? Because Lively's man is on Luka now. So all you have is a read in the corner, or you as the roll man going downhill. If they don't tag him, he's dunking. If they do tag him, he's throwing an easy swing pass out to the corner. That's one of the, for all of the downsides of 4-out spacing, one of the upsides of 4-out spacing is it's like really set up easy for reads out of a blitz because it's so spread out and the reads are just very simple. As Luka comes off the screen and gets the double, he's going to throw it to Lively over the top, and Lively just has a simple 3-on-2 to make at that point because Kyrie's above the break on the left wing and he's probably not going to get helped off of it. And if he does, it's just an extra pass out of the corner. So you really can't blitz. They're gonna score at a high rate there. If you duck under picks, he's hitting 38% of off the dribble threes. If you chase over the top, he's gonna get you trapped in trail position and work downhill until he can make a read. And then if you do switch, he's a deadly ISO and post up threat. He's damn near 1.1 points per ISO and post up. So like, there's just not really a defensive scheme that you can throw at him that will shut him down. Like even in the Boston series, like it specifically came down to Boston tilting those attempts towards above the break threes for limited shooters, but that was more about the roster. Like, to be clear, like if you put Luka in Boston in Jason Tatum's spot and he runs the exact same ball screen sequence with Kristaps Porzingis, and it's always Derek White or Drew Holiday or Jaylen Brown that's catching above the break threes out of that, like those are going to all of a sudden be great shots that Luka's demonstrating. So like, there's another conversation to have about roster building and like whether or not some of the offensive limitations of those guys that created the elite Dallas defense, that if there's like a give and take that comes with that. But in terms of just strictly in a vacuum, if I'm building a roster from scratch, Luka is the best perimeter initiator in the league right now. And there's no coverage that works against him, and it creates these small, easy opportunities for your offensive players, which like there's a lack of versatility with Luka, right? Like with Luka, I kind of have to play 4 out and I kind of have to be heliocentric. Luka's not exactly, remember those stats that I read to you with Giannis about, remember those stats I read to you about Giannis about the percentage of his buckets that came as a play finisher? So 56% of Giannis's buckets came as a play finisher. 65% of Luka's made baskets came directly out of post-ups, ISOs, and pick and rolls as the shooter. So like that, there's some truth to the fact that like he has some limitations in terms of the way you can build around him. But at the same time, I can flip that around and be like, okay, there's only one way to build, but it's pretty simple. Like, give me a secondary shot creator that can run the offense when Luka's on the bench and run the offense when Luka needs a possession off. And then I need a couple of guys who can screen and roll hard to the rim as like vertical spacers. And then I just need 3-and-D guys. I need guys that can guard and go stand in the corner and just make really simple reads. And so like there's a lack of versatility, but the flip side is like his method is a proven method. Give me an elite defense and a legit secondary shot creator with Luka, and I have a really good chance to win the title. And that's the main reason why I have him up at number 2 on this list. This was the first finals run of Luka's career. He averaged 29 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists on 56% true shooting. Struggled a bit with efficiency. That's a 6% drop in true shooting, but he also was a bit banged up. I'm not going to get into that right now, though. We'll get into that later when we're talking about his weaknesses. But he had several big moments. He went crazy in the fourth quarter against the Clippers in Game 2. If you remember, that's when he hit the pair of step-back threes and assisted a couple more in that stretch. He made the read to PJ Washington in Game 6 against the Thunder that got that essentially ended up winning the series for Dallas. He hit the game winner over Rudy Gobert in Game 2 against Minnesota, and he also had that crazy scoring burst in the first quarter of Game 5 against Minnesota that basically executed the Timberwolves at that point. So like really, really impressive playoff run, although he did run into some issues in the finals. We'll get more into that in a minute. Basically proved, though, to that point that I was making, that if you give Luka an elite defense and a secondary shot creator, you just have a really good chance to win the title. And that's a strong foundation to build off. Now, weaknesses. Everything for Luka in terms of untapped potential comes down to his physical conditioning. There are 2 primary reasons that, or areas, I should say, where he runs into issues with his physical conditioning: fatigue and on-ball defense. Let's talk about fatigue first. Luka pretty consistently wore down at the end of playoff games this year. He shot just 6 for 17 in clutch situations in the finals run. I think that's like right around 35%. And he shot just 2 for 8 from 3 in clutch situations. Again, anytime the game was within 5 with less than 5 minutes left, Luka's efficiency tanked as he struggled to get separation and lift on his jump shot. He also shot just 3 for 24 from 3 over the final 3 games of the NBA Finals. And like, most of that, to me, especially on the eye test as you're watching, he's just not getting the same amount of lift and separation that he needs to get. Now, obviously, there's a health element to that. We'll get more into that here in just a minute. The second area where we see Luka's lack of conditioning manifest is on the defensive end. And I thought he had the most embarrassingly bad defensive performance I've ever seen in the finals against Boston. They were routinely putting him in action and beating him off the dribble to get their defense into rotation. And from there, obviously, you're dead against Boston because they have so much shooting and ball handling. Now, the conversation around Luka on the defensive end is complicated because there's on the ball and then there's off the ball, right? The off-ball situation, like playing passing lanes and like reading the ball handler, he's actually been very, very good. I shouldn't say very, very good, but he's been useful. right? Like, and he had some big plays. Like, you guys remember the big steal on the lob pass against Minnesota where he baited Mike Conley into not taking the floater, but then like stepped back and got the steal on the lob pass. Like, that's him understanding, reading the ball handler and baiting and making a defensive play. Like, he's actually become a useful off-ball player, but on the ball, which we primarily saw against the Clippers and Celtics. And there's some truth to the matchup part of this, right? Like, certain teams are space you out and attack matchup teams, and other teams are kind of like running a different type of offensive style, right? And so the Clippers and Celtics are both like drive and kick teams, and so they were hunting matchups. And one of the unique things about Luka is, like, usually when you're trying to save a on-ball defender that can't guard, you want to do a hedge and recover scheme. We see this a ton with guards, right? Like, Steph Curry's been doing this with the Warriors forever. Oh, you're trying to pick on Steph in a switch. All he's going to do is, as you're coming off the screen this side, he's going to throw a hedge to force you to take a negative dribble away from the basket, and then he's going to recover to the screener. Because as that screener sets the screen, he's slipping out of it to the three-point line. So the hedge is here, and this guy's running all the way over here to shoot, right? So Steph will throw the hedge, and then he'll sprint back to the shooter, right? Well, Luka is so slow-footed that you can't hedge with him. If he hedges out here and that guy slips to the three-point line, he's just going to be wide open, because Luka's not the kind of guy that can throw a hedge and then sprint back out on a closeout. That makes it so he pretty much has to switch. And from there, like, there were some good possessions. To his credit, he had some big stops against Paul George in the first round series in ISO. However, Paul George is a pull-up shooting wing who made just 1.9 shots in the restricted area per game last year. He's a guy who basically doesn't drive to the basket, right? And when he ran into real driving guards and wings against Boston, he had serious issues, and he was giving blow-bys up to everybody, right? And that was the main issue. And like that, I think, does come down to his conditioning, just like the tailing off at the tail end of games like we saw in the postseason run. Now, I heard three main excuses from Mavs fans for the stuff with Luka's health and his defense. The first one I'd hear would be his job is to get beat off the dribble and to funnel guys into rim protection. That's literally not a thing. It's actually one of the most absurd excuses I've ever heard. Yes, coaching staffs will set up their weakest perimeter defenders with lots of backside help in case they do get beat, but they still have a job to try to flatten out drives as much as possible, meaning instead of giving up a straight line drive, you need to flatten them out and make them go laterally as much as possible. And Luka just didn't do a good job of that. And Jason Kidd, the head coach of his team, specifically called Luka out in the playoff run for not defending well enough, which is something he wouldn't do if he was, schematically being asked to give up blow-bys. Like, that's completely absurd. The second big excuse I heard from Mavs fans was he was injured. Yes, he was, but he also looked chunky and out of shape most of the last few seasons. Those things are directly related. Like, if Luka was in peak physical condition, like most of his peers are, he'd be less susceptible to injuries. That's just a fact. And then the third excuse, if Luka was in better shape, he'd be smaller and he wouldn't be able to bully guys the way that he does. And that's based on the fact that Luka's been getting bigger each year, not smaller, right? Like, Luka's not losing weight. He's actually putting weight on, right? And the counter examples to that are, like, if you look up video of him in the bubble cooking the Clippers, he looks small and thin and quick. If you look up that video that was going around of him as a rookie having all those dunks, he looks small and thin and quick. And so, like, there's a lot of focus on him being bigger and stronger than everybody. But here's the thing. First of all, if he trimmed his body fat and replaced that with functional muscle mass, he would be big and strong enough to bully people while also being mobile enough and conditioned enough to defend and to stay strong late into games. So, like, that's the thing, is, like, that's not a valid excuse, in my opinion. And then there's a bonus excuse, which I've heard from a lot of people, which is like, this is just what happens when you get older, you put on weight. Yeah, regular dudes who are not professional athletes get a little doughy in their mid-20s. That's a thing. But that's not a thing for professional athletes. Luka's 25 years old. He should be in the best shape of his life, and he's just not. And he's seeing some diminishing returns there. It feels silly to say because he's the second best basketball player in the world, but it's all about unfulfilled potential. Luka is already the second best player in the world, despite not putting in the work behind the scenes that he needs to rectify those issues. I think Luka could literally rule this league, like run this damn league the way the all-time greats do, if he pushed himself to the next level in terms of his physical conditioning. I think it's valid criticism. So in summary, Luka has some shortcomings. He doesn't take as good a care of body as he needs to. He's not super versatile. There aren't many defensive roles he can fill, and he kind of is stuck in 4 out, 1 in heliocentric offense at this point. So building around him does kind of require you to go one specific direction on both ends of the floor, but he is such a profoundly gifted offensive initiator that building a championship contender around him is easier than it is for almost every other player in the league. You just need a handful of things. Secondary shot creator to run the offense when Luka's off the floor and when he needs a break, rim running screener, and then 3-and-D play finishers. Guys that they don't have to initiate offense, they don't have to run action, they don't have to make reads. All they have to do is guard on the other end of the floor and go stand in the corner until Luka spoon feeds you threes. And just like that, you're automatically one of the top 7 or 8 teams in the league, which gives you a good chance to win the title. So to put it simply, I like my chances to win a title building from scratch around Luka this year more than any player in the league except for Nikola Jokic, which is why I put him at number 2. All right, let's get to the mailbag, and then we'll get out of here for the day. Out of just sheer curiosity, say Tatum almost completely shuts off the stupid pull-up threes and just spends the entire season attacking the rim while improving his net three-point percentage to close to his catch-and-shoot one of about 39.6%. Say he becomes a 38% three-point shooter and like a 50 to 52% overall shooter. Where would you say he'd rank at that point? Because if the projection is Ant is awful in the... Wait, hold on. Because if the projection is Ant is somehow going to magically do that when we haven't seen it apart from short bursts in the playoffs, remember Ant was awful in the Western Conference Finals, whereas Tatum legitimately could get to that point if he eliminates some of the Kobe shots from his game. I think to me it makes more sense to have Tatum above him. Not saying he'll ever actually do that, but if we were to make the effort, he probably could get to that elite offensive engine status. So it's tricky because you can't completely stop taking pull-up threes because you got to take a certain amount of them to keep the defense honest, right? The best example I used was LeBron, right? Like Tatum takes about 7.5 pull-up jump shots in a game. LeBron takes about 3.5. LeBron's like he's only getting like 0.97 points per possession, which is like solid but not great. But it's like that's not the purpose. He's not doing that to like drive his offense. He's using it as a counter to keep the defense honest, right? That's what I want Tatum to get down to, is like right around that 3 to 4 pull-up jump shot attempts per game. But if he did that, he would become more efficient, especially in the postseason. Here's a real basic stat to demonstrate this to you guys. Jason Tatum has never had a playoff run over 59% true shooting, which, by the way, Anthony Edwards just did. But his peers at the forward position have all done it pretty consistently. LeBron has done it 7 times. KD has done it 7 times. Kawhi has done it 9 times. Tatum's done it bagel times in 7 playoff runs. And that comes down to the fact that he's not getting enough of the high-value, efficient shots closer to the rim. So, like, if Jason Tatum took 4 pull-up jump shots a game less than he usually did and directed those all towards post-up attempts, drives, additional things that kind of drive more efficient shot types, I do think he could enter into a higher echelon of efficiency in the postseason. But I don't think he'll ever enter the ranks of like the great offensive engines just simply because he doesn't have an A+ offensive skill. Like he's just pretty good at everything, but he's not great at anything on the offensive end. So what that means is he'll inevitably run into an elite defense that can stop him from getting to his spots consistently. And then when that happens, that's where his efficiency can run into some issues compared to the regular season. Just to mention, Jason Tatum is a career 84% free throw shooter. Never shot below 81% in a season. Just thought it was worth bringing up in reference to Ant's best free throw shooting season and the connection with overall shooting. For the record, I've said this many times, I think Tatum is a good shooter who's just in a slump. Do I think he's a good pull-up shooter? No, but there are some reasons there. I think the main reason for Tatum not being a good pull-up shooter is he has a really long mechanical gather. Like he really tucks that elbow and gets the ball up underneath before he rises up, and that just stops fluidity and stops energy transfer. Like really good pull-up shooters are usually super fluid and there's no hitch and they have a quick gather, which Tatum just doesn't have. So like, do I think Tatum will ever be a great pull-up shooter at volume? Probably not. I think he'll have good seasons and good playoff runs over the course of his career because he just works so hard on it. But I don't think it'll be something that ever becomes a consistent foundational skill for him. But I do think he's a very good shooter. He's just in a shooting slump right now, and he will eventually get out of it. I think the idea of Ant getting exposed comes from him finally playing a team with good rim protection and not doing well. Teams are going to exploit that. Again, guys, he averaged 25, 9, and 8 in the conference finals. So, like, it's not like he, like, completely fell flat on his ass. He really struggled in the first 2 games. And then I want to say he was like, what was he, like 28, 10, and 8 or something in the final 3 games of that series? Like, he was still putting up crazy numbers. And, like, rim protection certainly makes things tougher for everybody. Like, elite rim protection has historically won in the NBA for a long time, right? Like, that goes without saying, especially with Rudy Gobert on the floor. But that was only part of the issue. The major issue was actually not about rim protection. It was more about just getting the ball out of Anthony Edwards' hands. And that started at the tail end of the Denver series when they started getting really aggressive with Jokic up to the level of the screen. Bringing 2 defenders on Ant in ball screens, and then Gobert and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels and Kyle Anderson and some of their limited offensive players not being able to convert those 4-on-3s, that was the real issue that was hurting Minnesota as much as anything else. My main criticism with Ant is in the first 2 games of that series in particular, he just was really passive when Dallas was forcing the ball out of his hands. People are too focused on how high Ant is that they are completely ignoring how fucking high Shea is as well relative to his accomplishments or lack thereof. Remember, guys, this list is not about accomplishments at all whatsoever. It is entirely about projection for this coming October through June. All of these people complaining in the comments about your Anthony Edwards ranking, but you dropped the video 10 minutes ago. They didn't watch anything you said. This is a super common thing that I see on the show. People just complain for the sake of complaining. They don't actually ever hear me out in what I have to say. But for the record, like, that's kind of an inherent part of this business. I've experienced that ever since I started podcasting or even just talking about basketball on Twitter. Like, there's good faith debating and then there's bad faith debating. There are people that are like, hey, I disagree with you. Here's why. And then there's the fuck you, you asshole, you're wrong. Like, that's an eternal part of this business that will never go away. No matter how much work I put in, no matter how much I defend my stances, no matter how open-minded I try to be, no matter how unbiased I try to be, there will always be angry people yelling in the comments. It's just kind of a natural part of this job. It just comes with the territory. Tatum has been and is already a perennial MVP candidate. He has 1 top 5 MVP finish in 7 seasons. Right now, DraftKings has Anthony Edwards at plus 1,200 to win MVP, and they have Tatum at plus 1,800 to win MVP. So, I mean, that's a pretty strong indicator that Tatum's just not in that group of guys that we would consider to be perennial MVP candidates. There are 0 things that Ant does better than Jason Tatum on a basketball court. 0. I'm saving this video and coming back in next June. 2 things. Ant is substantially quicker with his first step and is a better pull-up shooter. Those are 2 very simple things on offense that he's better than Tatum. I don't have to get any further into it. Second piece, I also think Tatum will be playing in June. And I think Ant probably won't because the Celtics have the most talent in the league by far, and the Wolves have a roster with several limitations. I'm worried with Gobert that they'll ever be able to win at the highest levels because he just clogs things up for their offense. Last question. How do you think Minnesota and OKC would fare? This is a really interesting question. How do you think Minnesota and OKC would fare if they switched superstars for the 2024-2025 season and playoffs? Ant with more spacing and SGA with a more experienced cast. Weirdly enough, I actually think both teams would be better. And this is a super interesting kind of like thought exercise with basketball. Ant is a downhill driving force. So putting him in real 5-out spacing would unlock that in a major way. The Timberwolves, because they have such limited offensive personnel, like guys on the floor like Jaden and like we talked about so many times, those guys actually make it so that you have to be more surgical on offense. So like I look at it like this. Ant in Oklahoma City would be more valuable because of the spacing, and Shea in Minnesota alongside that elite defense would be more valuable because he could be the surgical offensive player to create something out of nothing in bad spacing situations. So like, ironically, like I think if you swap both of them, I think Minnesota and Oklahoma City both get better, which is a really interesting basketball concept. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you for supporting the show. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, I did a reaction with my buddy Luke on the first 3 episodes of Rings of Power. You can find that we're on YouTube under Two Sons Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts under Two Sons Podcast. And then tomorrow we'll be recording a reaction to the episode 4 as well. So make sure you guys check that out. Again, we'll be back on Friday with number 1 on this list. And then next week, we have some fun stuff before we get into our season previews. Again, I appreciate you guys for supporting the show and for rocking with me. And I will see you guys in a couple of days.